Let's work through the different sizes of a bias tape maker set. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to be walking through a bias tape maker set and seeing how it works. So I got this one off Amazon. It's from Madam Sew. It comes with 4 different size bias tape makers: a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. Now the way that this works is it does it in a single fold bias tape, then you can obviously make that a double fold. And then it also includes instructions for you on the width strip for your fabric that you're going to be using for both normal fabric as well as thin fabric, and then step-by-step instructions. So we are going to be walking through all of the makers today. We are not going to be doing anything with that binding presser foot. This is all just about getting the strips of fabric and seeing how it works with the bias tape maker and the iron. So I'm going to use 4 different pieces of fabric to help make it a little easier in showing the different sizes. So this Scotty Dog Christmas fabric is going to be our 1 inch bias tape. So I just went through and cut it out. Very simple to do. The Easter Dogs is going to be our 3/4 inch bias tape. The Red Christmas Dogs is going to be our 1/2 inch bias tape. And then we will be finishing all of this out with the St. Patrick's Day Dogs being our 1/4 inch bias tape. When I was cutting this one out, I started to notice just really how narrow this is. So it will be interesting to see how it turns out. So as you can see here, I have all 4 strips ranging from small to large, ready to be made into bias tape using the little items that we got in our kit. So now I'm going to bring these over to my iron. I have all of my strips here with me, just like we cut out before, and I am going to be starting with the smallest strip. So to be honest, I was a little worried about using this one at first just because it was so narrow. So the 1/4 inch bias tape maker is this green one in my kit. Now the instructions show that you want to use your iron, your ironing board, and then the tape maker of your choice. So we are starting off with that 1/4 inch maker, and we are going to be using our owl as well to get the fabric into the maker. So you put it wrong side facing up. We're going to put this into the maker, and you just very carefully push it in. So there's a little opening underneath that plastic portion, and you just are going to push your fabric through. And then from the top, I'll show you the angle that you can see an opening, and we put our owl point in there to help drag the fabric through the maker. Now I found this, as you're going to see in a second, pretty difficult to do, especially for this tiny one, just because the fabric was so thin and there wasn't a lot of it, and it was very hard to get it to go through that little point and for me to actually get it out the other side. Now I don't know if this was because maybe the fabric that I was using just really isn't meant for being bias tape this thin, if there's just something about making this very, very narrow bias tape, but this one was very difficult for me to get out. But once I finally did, it did fold over like you would expect. Now the tip did not stay folded over. I had to kind of use my pins to manually press that down. And then once I did get it pressed down, I grabbed the iron and then I went over and sort of used the steam to really press it out. Once I had that initial press done, I grabbed one of the pins like the instructions said to do. So the instructions say you want to like pin it to your ironing board, and then you just pull the tape maker very slowly away. So as you can see here, I'm just very gently pulling it, and then it's folding the fabric as you go. Now because this is so narrow, there's not a ton of fabric to stay folded over for you, so you kind of have to work a little quickly with this. And I did notice that it was working. It was just something that it took a lot of patience to make sure that it was turning out correctly, but I was able to get that very, very thin and narrow single fold bias tape that is a 1/4 inch. I do think in the future I probably would have used maybe thinner fabric or just a different type of fabric for it. Next, it was time to work on the 1/2 inch bias tape maker. For this one, I actually found it really easy, which again, I don't know if it's because I did use a different fabric type or what was going on, if it just worked better, but very similar to before, I just pushed my fabric with the wrong side facing up into the tape maker. You can see that you can actually see the fabric in there. Grab my owl and then just pulled that all the way through, and I was able to get it out pretty quickly for this one as well. So it started to come out the other end, and then I was just very carefully able to pull it out so that I had that really nice folded look. And very similar to before, I then am just able to press this out. Once I did the initial pressing, I used my pin to hold it in place, and then just very carefully pulled it as I was pressing it down. Since this one was slightly thicker, it worked a lot better than that super thin one, and I found that the bias tape actually looked super nice. Once I did this one time, I went ahead and tried to see what double fold bias tape would look like with this, so I just folded it over a second time and then pressed this out too, and I found it looked really good. And I think this would be a great way to make double fold bias tape, especially if you wanted like a very narrow, more professional looking one. I found that this worked great, and I probably will be using it in the future. Next up, it was time for the 3/4 inch bias tape maker. So very similar to before, these are all the same process, it just really depends on what size fabric you're using. And I started to have issues with this fabric as well, and I don't know, I'm gonna guess it was something to do with the different types of fabric, even though they were all cotton, but it was really getting stuck in the tape maker as I was going along and started to sort of fold in on itself. So you can see here that it was folding in at that edge when I was pushing it in, even though I hadn't really folded it or done that. It just for some reason was starting to do that process. This may have been a user error and I had to do it multiple times, but one trick I started to learn was, I think if you cut the strip out slightly on diagonal on either end, so it's a little bit shorter at the front, so when you pull it through, it seemed like it made it a lot easier to get the process started. So if you ever struggle with it, I would highly recommend maybe cutting off a little diagonal on either side just to get the process started, for it to get the fold underway, and then you can go through, press it out as normal, and you'll get that really nice bias tape look. And then finally it was time for the 1-inch bias tape. I had actually done this before with this bias tape maker for the 1-inch and found it so easy. It turns out so well. It's perfect for quilts, and I will be having a video coming up on a quilt that I made, and I used this bias tape maker for it, and it turned out so nicely. So this is probably going to be my most used size, is this 1-inch bias tape maker, as then you can fold it over to get that double fold bias tape, which is the exact width that I use for quilting. So here are what all 4 look like. I think that overall this kit is really helpful. The 1-inch was definitely the easiest, and then that 1/4 inch one, that was the hardest for me. So I may just need to practice a little bit more with it. But if you make a lot of bias tape and you want to make your own custom bias tape, I would highly recommend this as a way to go about it, in case you are tired of trying to manually measure everything out. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to use the bias tape maker for both single fold and double fold bias tape. Let me know what you want to see next, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.